It seems like everyone talks about the ending and everyone talks about the beginning, but no one ever talks about that good old sophomore slump. Or is it? Sometimes, guys, book 2 is quite good. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back to talk a little middle book. Well, it isn't always going to be a middle book, guys, because I am going to be talking about not only trilogies, but also series, and I'm going to be talking about best second books, sophomore effort in a book trilogy or a series. Now, the reason I want to do this, guys, because it seems like when it comes to a trilogy, you have that very famous middle book syndrome where it just seems like, okay, that's the one that kind of drug the series down a little bit. But every once in a while, that second book is actually quite good. It's rare, but it does happen. But also, with a longer series, a lot of the times I find myself saying, you know what, the first book's okay, but why don't you try to read the second book, and if it don't grab you by then, I think maybe it might not be for you, and I have several instances of that. So guys, these aren't going to be ranked. They are just 15 books that I think these are great second books that really stuck in my memory. That's the ones I'm going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and kick it off, guys, with quite an obvious one. George R.R. Martin's Clash of Kings. How do you take what is probably the greatest book 1 ever and follow it up with maybe one of the best book 2s ever? Well, he finds a way with Clash of Kings. I think what makes this one great is you start to explore Westeros a little bit more outside of what's going on at King's Landing and across the Narrow Sea. With this one, you know, you get to actually see things of Stannis, where Stannis was kind of like this shroud of mystery in the background of the first book. You get to see that. You get to see Melisandre. You get to see all these interesting new things of all the different kings that are trying to vie for this contested throne. Let's put it that way. I feel like by now, guys, if you don't know the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, I don't know if you've ever really call yourself a fantasy fan, but this is an amazing book. It follows up, like I said, probably my favorite book 1 of all time, and it does so just brilliantly. George adds the coolest POV characters, and he always finds a way to juggle everything just right, so you never feel overwhelmed, and you feel like you're getting just enough of the world to continue with that series. So if you read book 1 and you don't like it, I say read book 2. If you're still not liking it, it's amazing, but you know, it does happen from time to time. That's the same deal with Jade War by Fonda Lee. Now, look, I love Jade City a lot, and in most cases, and even up until recently, I said Jade City was my favorite because it was most like The Godfather, but now that's had a little time to marinate. I think Jade War might be my favorite, and that's rare in a trilogy that middle book ends up being your favorite. And I think this is the one, just it really gets into the backroom politics of what makes this world tick. As far as that first book, I felt like you really were getting into the, Mario Puzo's Godfather. This one expands it just a little bit, gives us a little bit more of what's going on behind closed doors with the family, gets more into those familial relationships between the main characters. That's something. The stuff with Hilo and Shay is next level in this book, and it has a very controversial thing where you're going to either be all in for Hilo or you're going to turn on Hilo, and I think that's something that makes this book really special in my memory because I will always be on Team Hilo did nothing wrong. And that's all you need to know about that, guys. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you feel like you know by now that I do love Red Rising. But something that happened with me with Red Rising was I read the first book and I was like, it didn't really give me what I was hoping for. I was hoping for a little bit more, like Ender's Game meets something else, and I felt like I got Lord of the Flies, and I got what I wanted out of book 2 in Golden Sun. Now, Golden Sun, I say, is maybe my favorite book 2 of all time because it took a series that I was like lukewarm on and made it one of my favorite series today. This is probably my favorite sci-fi book I've read in the 2000s, guys. I absolutely adore this book. I think it's just superb. It takes everything that was presented in the first book, makes it even better, makes the stakes even higher, makes the intrigue and the action and everything about the character relationships and just cranks them to 11 and gives you the biggest gut punch that you've ever gotten that will have you reaching for book 3 immediately. So without a doubt, the best ending out of any of these books I'm going to talk about today. This one is an all-timer. I think you would love it. So if you were okay, I don't know how I feel about Red Rising after book 1, read Golden Sun. I promise you, you're going to want to keep going. But if you don't, hey, not one thing. No one thing is for everyone, right? Well, how about the Arthurian legend? I feel like that's something everyone has kind of taken a stab at, but I don't feel like any have done it better outside of Sir Thomas Malory than Bernard Cornwell. That, of course, is Enemy of God, which is the second book in the Warlord Chronicles. What I love about this one, guys, is he took all the stuff from book 1 that I didn't really care for, kind of scrapped it and moved along. So we've gotten the whole world established now, the whole cast. And with this one, you've got Durful very much a father figure in this one, and the dad stuff in here will absolutely tear you apart. But this is the book where I took his fighting and his wars and his battles and his one-on-one in a duel, and I said, I have finally found someone that is better than Joe Abercrombie at writing the one-on-one fight in the circle. It's that good, guys. This book has some of the best duels I've ever seen in anything I've ever read before, and I think it's kind of spoiled me a little bit on historical fiction, because I kind of I went to another Arthur series after this. It didn't really click for me, and I do think that this has some effect on it. But Enemy of God, absolutely my favorite book in that series, and it's one that made me say I want to try a lot of things by Bernard Cornwell, because I think he's just phenomenal, especially at writing war scenes. Next up, guys, an author I feel like has gotten a kind of a lukewarm response on my channel. I've had a great time with his stuff. I'm talking about book 2 in the Nevernight Chronicle by Jay Kristoff. This is Godsgrave, and it's just showing up. It's very, very bright. The thing with Godsgrave that I loved is I love that he took Mia and set her in the world of Ridley Scott's Gladiator, basically. And I'm completely, that's a trope in fantasy I will never get tired of. Give me someone who's fighting in the arena as a gladiator or, unwilling participant and fights their way to the top. That's a story I'm always going to be interested in. But he takes a couple of timelines and kind of mixes them together here. And this is the book where I started saying, he's doing an amazing job of developing every other character besides just Mia. Every single side character, like all the ones that you meet, talk about Gladiator. All those secondary gladiators that Maximus was fighting with? He does that in this, but he gives all of them a good backstory, and it's always pretty damn good. So very satisfying middle book. Again, this, I think I've got 3 instances where the middle book in a trilogy is my favorite, and this is definitely one of them. Godsgrave was just excellent. So guys, if you aren't really caring for Nevernight Chronicle, and the thing is people will tell me they don't want to read footnotes. You don't have to read the footnotes to enjoy that story. I don't know why that is such a sticking point for some people. But yeah, Godsgrave is really, really excellent, especially if you're into the whole gladiator deal. Now, whenever I do a list like this, people are always like, I can't believe you don't have any Brandon Sanderson on here. Well, I don't have any Brandon Sanderson on here. I'm kidding. I have some Brandon Sanderson on here. But guys, again, if you've been a constant watcher of this channel, you know that I think Words of Radiance is one of the best fantasy books that have ever been written. I think Words of Radiance, basically, Way of Kings, I liked a lot because I felt like the payoff was worth the wait. It took a long time to get there, though. This one, from go, I think that this is the best that you get of any of the flashback stories in this. I feel like Shallan may not be a character for everybody, but her flashback story is just incredible, and it has such a satisfying payoff. And then you got the real-time stuff going on, and all the stuff with Adolin. I think Adolin really is a standout character in this book, and it's making this weird noise because I got these custom covers on here, which are really great, by the way. Kraken Book Company sent those to me. But I love it. I think that Words of Radiance, again, was the peak of Stormlight Archive, to a point to where I feel like Stormlight Archive since Words of Radiance has kind of been, I like it, but I don't love it because Words of Radiance kind of set the bar so high. But yes, I'm as anticipating book number 5 of Stormlight Archive as anybody is. So don't take that the wrong way. I just felt like he hasn't reached those heights again with Stormlight Archive, yet it is still one of my favorite ongoing fantasy series. So you can't have a list like this and not have the Lord Ruler on here. I feel like he does book 2s in a series pretty good outside of Mistborn Era 2, which didn't really land for me. That was actually the book that kind of turned me off on that series. But, think back to Mistborn. He does a really good book 2 there as well. So what is next, guys? How about some dragons? You can't talk about some fantasy without some dragons, right? Well, this is a recent entrant that I read not that long ago. This is Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Cahill. This is from The Bound and the Broken. And the reason I have this here is I liked book 1 a lot. It felt like traditional fantasy that I used to read when I was younger with a little bit of adult spin in there. And I feel like he's doing the perfect balance of that. With Of Darkness and Light, he takes all those ideas and he just makes everything his own. Everything that you feel like he may have borrowed from something else, he makes it his own in this book. And he takes his own path. And it's just action-packed, you guys. I think he's one of the best in the game right now at writing action and just unfilmable epic war scenes, like something you could never imagine seeing on the big screen. If he was making a movie out of this, the budget would be $1 trillion. It's just that big. He does epic better than anyone I've read. out there. It's just so good. But it's the characters are just growing in a way that I want to take this journey with them. And I think he's really taking his time with it. He's introducing new characters that I'm really on board for. Like, I really got into the Atiri storyline in this one, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next one. I'm reading of War and Ruin here very, very soon. But yeah, that definitely, if you were kind of like the first book, you felt like it might have been derivative of some things. I think that when you get to this one, you will see, just like Robert Jordan did with Wheel of Time, you'll see that he does take his own path. And I bring that up, guys, because Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time is next with The Great Hunt. And I kind of have the same thing to say. Fellowship of the Ring is what Eye of the World felt like to me. It felt like, okay, well, you're doing the Terry Brooks thing. You're just repeating Fellowship of the Ring and changing some things around, making it your own a little bit. But, many people have said that was more of a hat tip than being derivative. I disagree. But what we can agree on is that Great Hunt is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I love a quest. I love a quest for a magical artifact. That's an easy one to get me in. And you get to a part in this book, if you know, Flicker Flicker, that just absolutely took this series from like, I feel like I've been on this ride before, to like, oh man, I am along for the ride now. Give me more of that. Has like this really just epic sword fight at the end that just completely blew me away. And it's where I first saw that Robert Jordan is the master of stringing along. Boom, he will reward you at the end. He will reward his readers every time with his final acts are some of the best ever in fantasy. And The Great Hunt introduces so many characters that I grew to love over the series. And again, I love the quest for the horn. And you got the ending of that was just like such a shocker to me. So Great Hunt and of Darkness and Light, they kind of have something in common there, and that people will say, oh, it kind of feels derivative of something else. Even if I don't necessarily agree all the way around, I will say that book 2 is the book that makes those series their own and makes it very, very addictive to where you cannot stop. How about my favorite modern fantasy series of all time, guys? How about The First Law? And book number 2 of that is Before They Are Hanged. Now, the reason I tell a lot of people, and it feels weird to say when you're talking about a trilogy, read at least 2 books. You've already read 2, you might as well go ahead and finish it, right? But what I tell people is that they'll read Blade itself and they'll be like, I don't know, it just seems like a book that's just nothing but like character development, which I'm fine with, but I know not everyone else is. They need them to do something. You kind of stand in one place. But Before They Are Hanged, the reason I think these get better as they go along, because this one is where you go on your quest, you get your fellowship together, and you go looking for that magical artifact. Again, that's something I'm always going to be on board for. And with this one, you get a lot of those characters that you got in the first book, but now they are on the same side, they're on the same page together, and you get introduced to Pharaoh. Actually, I think Pharaoh gets introduced to the first book. I've done this before. See, the thing is like The First Law is very much like Lord of the Rings, is where it can feel like one book, and you kind of have a hard time remembering what happened in which book, but I think Pharaoh did show up in the first book. Anyway, the relationship with Pharaoh and another character in the book is really the highlight here, but you get all different places. You start to go all over that map a little bit, and I felt like it makes the world so much bigger, and it just continues to grow and grow and get better and better. But yeah, not my favorite in the trilogy. My favorite is book number 3, but book 2 is definitely one that I feel like if you were just kind of whatever about the first book, I think that's the one that will let you know if that is a world that is going to connect with you or not. Next up, guys, how about a thriller? I don't have any thrillers on here. How about Wayward by Blake Crouch? Now, this is book number 2 of the Wayward Pines trilogy. And without giving too much away, because it is a big mystery that is revealed at the end of book 1, and book 2 kind of takes it in a different direction. So don't read that. Don't read the back if you haven't read book number 1 yet, because that mystery, you don't want it kind of spoiled for you. But what I love about it is you think, oh, I know the big secret now. No, you don't. You have no idea about the big secret. So many twists and turns with that series, and every damn, just like every Blake Crouch book, you can't stop turning the pages because you got to know what happens next. Or this one, you're asking yourself, I don't even know what's going on. And then when it's revealed to you, you're like, oh, wow. So you would think if you go back and reread it, you can probably see those things a little earlier. They're there if you're looking for them. But most times, if you're like myself and you're just kind of along for the ride, you aren't necessarily looking for them. But I haven't found too many people who have figured out what is going on with that book. They always have some kind of guess. If you're into things like Lost or that new series From, I think you're going to like the mystery box in here. And I can go ahead and tell you guys, he does stick the landing. So it is very much worth your time. How about The King, baby? You can't go at this without talking about The King, and you better come with The King. You better not miss, and he did not miss with book number 2 of The Dark Tower. This is the drawing of the 3. Another one that I tell people all the time. If you read through book 2 and it's not really for you, it might not be a series for you. But what I think I've always told people is they'll read book number 1, The Gunslinger, and they'll be a little confused. And I think you're not really supposed to be. But let's just say it's not representative as the series as a whole. And Dark Tower 2, the drawing of the 3, I think gives you a little bit more idea of what you're in store for. Now, there's going to be a lot more questions than answers still. I mean, that's just what this series is about. It is book 2 of 7, so it's not going to give you all your answers, but it's going to give you an idea of what you're in store for the series. And it introduces my favorite character in the series, in Eddie Dean. So that's always going to be something that I'm very much in favor of. But the Dark Tower, guys, is a top 5 series all time for me. And a big part of it is because of the drawing of the 3. For a long time, that was my favorite Dark Tower book. It's really flip a coin between 2, 3, and 4 for me. But with that one, I mean, it's so out there. And there's never a time when you will be reading Drawing the 3 and being like, oh, yeah, this is just like that other book. No, it is the most unique thing I think I'd ever read up to that point. It's still quite unique. How about something a little more modern? How about the Lycanius trilogy, guys, and with the echo of things to come? Now, I love The Shadow of What Was Lost. That's probably still my favorite book in the series, but I like this one a lot because it answered a lot and it presented even more questions, but in that kind of way where you're like, I have to know the answer now. Now, with this one, I've got to say, this might be the most shocking ending that I have read in fantasy. The ending, it wasn't shocking in the way that you expect, let's put it that way, but it was shocking in like, there's no way he can beat the epilogue from book 1. Oh, he did. And it's like, wait, what? How? How does this work? And that's the mysteries of the Lycanius universe that you got to get into. If you don't want to know anything about it, I'm not going to tell you. But I'll say that there is an element of a plot device that he uses that's either going to work for you or not. And I think book 2 just kind of capitalizes on that and shows that this guy had like Charlie from Always Sunny, where he's got like the board with all the strings and he's trying to explain it. It's very much in that way, and things start to become a little more clearer and other things become way more confusing. But again, that ending is going to have you being like, holy cow, I've got to read book 3 immediately. And I think that's the best thing you can have in a trilogy, is if book 2 has the reader immediately saying they have to reach for the next book. Well, I think you're doing your readers a service there. Talked about this one recently, and it really was just that good. It is the best in that series, in my opinion. This is A Fool's Hope, book number 2 in the Last War trilogy by Mike Shackle. I did review the whole trilogy on the channel, but Fool's Hope is another one of those books that has an interesting plot device. It's either going to work for you or not, but for me, it landed in every way, and it took the story from like, this is really good, this is really dark and grim, I'm really feeling like I can vibe with this as a First Law fan, and it did something that just completely made it awesome. Like, I could not get enough of it. I could not stop thinking about it. And it made some characters that you thought might not be as important or as big of a deal into a central part of the story. And that really did surprise me. And it had this way of maybe some characters you thought had left the story, of you seeing some of those characters again, and it just making the story more and more rich. So it stays just as grim, just as brutal. He still doesn't pull any punches, but he starts to give some of these secondary characters some life, introduces some new characters like Rolassus, who will really grow on you as a character that you will just end up loving by the end of the story. And he gives you a glimpse of the point of view from the enemy, much different. Like the first book, you're just like full all in, just an evil guy. And this one, you get the point of view of someone from like, the ground level and see things from their point of view. And it might not be exactly what you're expecting. It's quite good. So Mike Shackle is obviously awesome at what he does in developing some of these characters. And Fool's Hope is just spectacular. I would read it again. If I could read just the middle book and be quite happy. All right, got a couple more here. How about some vampires, guys? I ain't got any vampires on here. What's it going to be? It's going to be Twilight, right? It's not going to be Twilight, guys. But hey, if you like Twilight, you do you. Remember, I'm happy as long as you're reading. Guys, how about The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, my vampire queen. The Vampire Lestat is one that I didn't know I wanted when I first read it, because I loved Interview with the Vampire. I still love Interview with the Vampire. The way that it ended, you would have never expected Lestat to have the story that he has in this one. And I think this might be my first instance in my reading life of unreliable narrator in that first book, is because Lestat is represented in one way in the first book, and he's presented in another way in this book, and it's kind of up to the reader to decide which one is the real one. Now, I think I know, as someone who has read further into the Vampire Chronicles, but with this one, you might think, Wow, that's really the story that you're going with, because I think that she had aged the character up to modern times at the time when the book came out, which would be in the 80s. And it was like, okay, well, where do you go from here? And she finds a neat way to do that to make him relevant to the modern day story. And Lestat is just one of the greatest literary characters ever created, and that's really where it began, because he really is just a foil in Interview with the Vampire, whereas this one, he really just... Obviously, it's called the Vampire Lestat because he does take the spotlight in more ways than one. I think it's going to become a character that you cannot get enough of, and that's why every time Vampire Chronicles started to move away from Lestat, she'd always bring him back front and center, because the fans do love him for a reason. But that's the book that I think will make you first fall in love with Lestat, as you learn all about his life before and concurrent with Interview with the Vampire, and learn some things that maybe Louis might have left out when he was recounting his life story in that first book. And last up, guys, I got to talk a little Truth and Courage, because I think that Valor is the most underrated book in The Faithful and the Fallen. Everyone always talks about the last two books. You know, they talk about the ending of Ruin and they talk about Wrath because its battles are amazing, and they are amazing, guys. Again, with this one, Macklin is my favorite character in The Faithful and the Fallen. This is where his story really begins to develop. And the cheat code, he has a gladiator storyline, and it has like a love angle that I didn't think that I wanted, and it was really good. But I think this is where he develops his villains a lot more, and I think he really starts to dive all in to the quest for those magical items and artifacts that our heroes are looking for. And for me, in the end, guys, it's all about Macklin in that book, and I think that is the most Macklin-heavy book in the entire series, and that's why Valor will always be one of my favorites in that quadrilogy. I don't know if I could rank those books. I try all the time. I know Ruin is my favorite, but I go back and forth between Wrath and Valor. But I think Valor might be my second favorite, and it's a damn good book too. So guys, there's 15 of my favorite second books in series. So maybe if you tried book one of some of these series and they haven't really clicked for you, hey, maybe pick these up, and maybe you will see, wow, okay, maybe I was wrong about some of these series the first time, or you can just have some finality to knowing if the series was for you or not. So I thought this was a fun topic. It was something that was presented to me by a viewer in my 95K live stream. So thank you for the idea. I thought it really was, because it's not always going to be a sophomore slump, guys. Every once in a while, you can either outshine the first, or you know what, just begin the change that is needed to make a series from good to great. So guys, what are some of the favorite second books in series or trilogies that you've read? I would love to hear about them. Have you read any of these? What did you think? Why don't you drop in the comments and let me know, guys, and I will talk to you there.